Good morning, everyone. Let's begin with a word of prayer. Gracious Heavenly Father, thank you for the beginning of a new year, for the blessings that you continue to pour out upon us, especially as we enter into this week where we remember Epiphany and, of course, the coming of the wise men, the whole Gentile Christmas thing. And we thank you for that gift because it is through that gift of Jesus that we are forgiven and saved. And as we embark on a journey through the book of Romans over the next couple of months, help us to better understand that message that Paul conveys, that we might celebrate and then go out and share, even more so, the good news about Jesus. It's in your name we pray. Amen. So good to be with you this morning. It's been a while since I've taught Bible class here at Zion. I think, if my memory serves me correctly, it was about a year ago that we did the 39 books of the Old Testament, that whole saga. As we embarked on the challenge of reading the Old Testament. I hope that was successful for folks. Some of you may be still doing it, which is just fine. So when Robin asked for some volunteers to teach this spring, we did a lot of traveling after that Bible class last year, so I really didn't have a lot of time to teach. This year, we're going to be here, Carol and I will be here for the spring until we go to Israel and Egypt with the group. So we've got 10 weeks, and I've decided that maybe one of the good things to do would be to dive into the book of Romans. Romans is a fascinating book. It's more than simply just a letter. It's 16 chapters. It's a lengthy book in many respects. And one of the reasons that I thought was a good thing to do is that the book of Romans, Paul's letter, is probably the most complete summary of the gospel, and it is the basis for much of Christian doctrine that we ascribe to, and particularly in the Lutheran Church. Many of our Lutheran doctrines come out of the book of Romans. And it's the irony of the whole thing. I mean, you've got this ultra-conservative Pharisee who gets converted, and in the end sort of writes the doctrine for what we ascribe to as Christians today, as Lutherans. So it's probably the best summary of the gospel and of Christian doctrine of the New Testament, certainly of the Bible, but of the New Testament as well. So we're going to embark on that over the next 10 weeks, God willing. Just a preface to all of this. The sanctuary is a wonderful place to worship in. It's not a particularly good classroom. And I really do enjoy discussion. One of the things I hate doing is having to run the microphone all over the place. I have a feeling that a lot of you really don't like talking into the microphone as well. But we're going to try discussion. This week and next week, a lot of it is sort of background information, so it's probably a little more of lecture. But when we get into actually the dive into the book of Romans, we're probably going to be able to take, I think, a couple of chapters, 2 or 3 chapters a week that we'll go through. You might want to bring your Bibles. There's Bibles in the pews. Those work just fine. There's also on phones and things. But this isn't a grand place to do discussion. So we'll navigate through that. We will try to do discussion. The beginning of all of this is sort of background information, and it is dealing with a lot of information, a lot of dates, and I'm hoping that actually this isn't what happens, is that your head explodes from all the information. Information overload at the beginning here may actually be a thing. There's a lot of dates, there's a lot of names, there's a lot of stuff as background. Quite honestly, you don't have to remember that stuff. I mean, I just lay it out there to help you understand how it pieces together. What becomes more important in the study of Scripture is understanding big picture things. What does this all mean? There's a transition that was taking place in Judea at the time of Jesus and Paul. It was partly the Roman Empire was going through a major transition. And it's important to understand that. And I'll give you the facts and details behind all that stuff. Quite honestly, the details, it doesn't really matter. But just understand there was change going on, political, social change that was taking place. And it will lead to the destruction of Judea. I mean, the destruction of the temple in the year 70, which is significant. It is the end of that nation, of that group of folks. So hopefully there won't be information overload and it will all explode here. Just take the details, the years and all that stuff and just sort of file it away, and you can always Google it if you want. Okay, so we're going to start this morning. I want to give a little background into this political and social climate that existed at the time of Jesus and the time of St. Paul. They're a couple of decades apart in some respects in terms of Paul's ministry and Jesus' ascension into heaven. But behind the book of Romans is the Roman Empire. It is the backdrop to discussing the New Testament and what was taking place in the Roman Empire at the time of Jesus and the time of St. Paul. So this map here is the largest area that the Roman Empire will ever evolve into. And as you can see, it is a Mediterranean existence. And I'll put names on here so you can see where countries are located at. It spread over to Iraq at one time. It did not include Persia, Iran, that area. It spread north into Austria and into France. It really didn't include the Germanic tribes up north. They will come down and actually become a real problem for the Roman Empire a couple of centuries after Jesus. You've got the northern fringe of Africa. That is the Roman Empire. It is a Mediterranean world. And in many respects, what we're interested in the Bible, of course, is this little spot right there, which is Judea or Judah or Israel, number of names that you can give to that. That is where most of the Bible takes place. But when we talk about Paul and his ministry takes place in what would be today Greece and Turkey. Most of his travels are there. That's where a lot of the church planting takes place. It's in Greece and Turkey. At the time, it would have been known as Macedonia. That was Greece. And Turkey would have been known as Asia or Asia Minor. So that is where Paul takes his ministry. And in fact, when you look at the area that Paul is in, it is this area right here. And the book of Romans will be written from Corinth, Greece, during Paul's third missionary journey. Paul makes 3 journeys in this area. On the first journey, it's sort of short. I'll show you a map of it eventually here. The second journey, he spends about a year and a half in Corinth. The Corinth church ended up having a lot of issues. And so on the third missionary journey, when he came back, he stopped off in Corinth for 3 months. It's what is often termed as the painful visit, where Paul really had to address some deep issues that were in the Corinthian church. We'll talk a little bit more about Corinth next week, because I'll give you a foundation for the book of Romans. But you can see there with the green arrow, that is where Paul writes the book of Romans from. It's from Corinth. It's his third missionary journey. 16 chapters, short book. He writes it from there. A lot of times, I think when people think about the Roman Empire, think it sort of as a monolithic country. Roman Empire, it's existed for about 1,300 years. And actually, the Roman Empire, its development incorporates 3 different stages. And it's important to understand those 3 different stages, because it's the third stage where the New Testament fits in. And it is in this stage that Paul will write the book of Romans. So there is the Roman kingdom that is operated by kings. There will be 7 of them. They are tyrants. That takes a place of over about a stretch of 250 years. There is the Roman Republic, which will begin in the year 509. The dates are actually sort of set in time because there's revolts that take place. But in the year 509, there's a major revolt that takes place, and the kings are tossed off, and then the Roman Republic emerges. A republic that's basically managed by the Roman Senate. And finally, in the year 27 BC, which would be a couple of decades before Jesus arrives on the scene, dictators move in, and that becomes the Roman Empire. Particularly the year 27, because that's when Julius Caesar ascends to power. So you've got three stages of the Roman Empire. It's important just on that sort of big level picture there to understand that. The Roman Empire is not this monolithic country that exists for 1,300 years. It is in development over centuries. And it goes through some horrific changes, culturally, internally, governmentally, politically. And so the kings, we'll talk about that in a few seconds, the republic, which I think most people view Roman Empire when they think about it as the republic, the Senate sort of governing things. And really the bulk of the 500 years at the end is the Roman Empire that we call the Roman Empire is actually operated by a bunch of dictators. I mean, they are the Caesars. They are the emperors that will rule, and the Senate becomes somewhat oblivious. It's of no value. Now, the Roman Empire, just as pushing this into the future, into AD, into our time side, the empire will split in the year 395 AD. It splits into east and west. I'll show you a map here why that actually makes some sense. The Roman Empire physically had grown so large it was hard to manage. And so the decision was made to divide it into two parts, east and west. The western side of the Roman Empire, what was known as the Latin side of the Roman Empire, is actually destroyed, defeated by the Germanic tribes that come out of Northern Europe in the year 395 AD. The eastern side of the empire, which you would know today as the Byzantine Empire, or the Eastern Orthodox Church, I mean, that's sort of resident in that side of the empire. The eastern side lasts a lot longer. That goes to 1453 when Islam finally conquers it. And the Eastern Empire is located at its capital. The capital of the Western Empire was in Rome. The capital of the Eastern Empire is in Byzantium, which is labeled then Constantinople, which today you know as Istanbul. That's sort of where the Greek Orthodox Church is also located at. That would be the Eastern Empire. That became an incredibly important central city. So this is all stuff after Jesus. What we're interested in is the Roman Empire and the birth of the empire, which actually is impacting Judea at the time of Christ. That's what we want to talk about. So, going back to the map, in 395, this is how it's split. The western side of the Roman Empire was basically the traditional Latin, Italian-based side, the original part of the Roman Empire. The eastern side is the Greek side. The eastern side is sort of the Greek Empire that's gobbled up by the Romans. Those two worlds collided. This huge, huge landmass that was known as the Roman Empire just was so diverse. So many different kinds of peoples and populations and cultures and backgrounds. It was really hard to manage. But the eastern side, the Greek side, is what influences, in many respects, the New Testament. Because what's the New Testament written in? Not Latin, but Greek. One of the things that the Greeks did was to really enculturate the people that they conquered. And they forced people to learn Greek. It was one of the reasons that I think many of the Jews lost Hebrew as a language, because the Greek language really spread over the eastern side of the Mediterranean Sea. You had to learn Greek, and in the end they translate the Old Testament, the Jewish Bible, into Greek, because that's the language. So these are the two sides of the Roman Empire, and as you can see, most of what we're dealing with is on the Greek side. The traditional side, the Latin side, more of where the city of Rome is located at, that will come to an end about 400 years after Jesus. So just to give you a little background about these three different stages here. The Roman kingdom, some of you may know some of the the mythology behind the Roman Empire. But the Roman kingdom was, there was Romulus and Remus. They were twins. The wolf raised them. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff behind it. That's the symbol for Rome, is the wolf. But in 753, tradition has it that the city of Rome, the city-state of Rome, was created by Romulus. And he becomes the king. He establishes his kingdom on the Palatine Hill. I'll show you a picture of that in a second. Rome is built on 7 hills. This is sort of the central part of the Roman Empire. It was that way for about 1,400 years. So in 753 BC, there's no records related to this, but what happened apparently was that Romulus, who becomes the king of the city-state, organizes what's called the Senate. The Senate initially was about 100 wealthy merchants and landholders. They were the people that the king needed in order to have his will done. And so the Senate at the very beginning is created largely as an advisory group to the king. Senate really doesn't have a lot of power. The Senate was wealthy people, and there were a lot of poor people in Rome. The Roman Empire was a relatively poor place in many respects, but there were wealthy individuals. And the 100 or so that were in the Senate originally, that number will go to about 300 over the period of the kingdom, is that they're the ones that advise the king, very little power. There were no civil rights. There was no human rights kind of thing at all. The king was a dictator, totally in control. The king made the decision. The Senate was the one who was empowered to carry it out. You go out and you do it. And if you don't do it, you're out. The only power that the Senate really did have was that when the king died, they got to elect a new king. And generally the king would come out of the Senate. I mean, it was a bunch of, if you understand oligarchs, it's the wealthy people who are in power because they control everything. And what happens? Well, the poor people, they don't have any say whatsoever. And in Rome, they were known as the plebs. And this really leads to some big, major issues during the kingdom period, this about 250-year period, where there's really no laws. The king's in control, the dictator, he decides, and the plebs, the poor folks just sort of, you're told what to do, and you pay taxes, and all this other kind of stuff. Well, there is a revolt. And after 7 kings, the plebs, the poor people really rose up against the government. The revolt happened in the year 509. The people had had enough. It's the last king of Rome. So what that leads to is, before we get to the transition, just to understand, in Italy at the time was divided up into a bunch of little city-states. Rome is where the dark red, Rome there, the city of Rome, that city-state. Venice is up where the green part is at. You can see Sicily and stuff, and all of these. What happened during the king period is that the king of Rome started to conquer the neighbors. And so over that period of time, the city of Rome, the city-state of Rome, starts to grow and become larger. Part of it was just the financial dynamics of things. We need more people to pay the taxes. We need more people to support the government. And so this begins to grow as the city of Rome takes over the boot known as Italy. So the revolt in 509 leads to the abandonment of the king, and the senators take over. The Senate. There is some sense of democracy in the Roman Republic because the management of the kingdom in Italy is divided up among magistrates, sort of the judges that are in charge, but it's the Roman Senate that pulls the strings because they're the wealthy. And as you well can imagine, that the magistrates that were put into power, elected in all of these areas, were very much indebted to the Senate, because they're the ones that kept him in power then. And so you've got a lot of corruption, a lot of problems. Powerful families, very wealthy families emerge in the Senate, powerful leaders. You can well imagine that 300 people, wealthy people sitting in a room, are not going to agree on everything. And so during this period of about 500 years, there is nearly perpetual war in the Roman Republic. It's all vying for power. I mean, who's got the power? It's not really a democracy per se. It's managed by the Senate, but there's no supreme leader, because they had it with them. The kings were bad. They were tyrants. And so during the Republic era, you've got sort of what I think a lot of people envision as typical Rome, is the Senate in control. And so there is this constant struggle inside of the culture between the haves and the have-nots, the wealthy and the poor. And it's estimated that well over 90% of the population lived in poverty. And when you've got the wealthy people sort of calling the shots, and the poor people sitting here and working their, skin and bone and probably having to pay taxes and stuff, there isn't a lot of love for the folks on top. So there's a lot of social unrest, perpetual war, the conflict. Roman citizenship becomes important. Who is a citizen of the empire? Because citizens of the empire had special privileges. And you didn't get citizenship just because you were born into it. In many respects, you got citizenship because of things you did. It may have been contributions to the senators. It may have been fighting in the military under a general. I mean, that's where a lot of Roman citizens emerged. It was because of their military service. They did something for the empire. They will expand into Africa. This happens during this period of time. Carthage is down in northern Africa, and they will enter into Greece. So this is what takes place right before Jesus arrives on the scene, and this actually becomes the birth of the Roman Empire. So you've got the kingships, they're gone. You've got the attempt to manage it with the Senate. They're not doing a great job. And so in the year 133 BC, there was substantial unrest in the Roman Republic. This struggle between the haves and the have-nots was really a huge issue. And there was conflict, particularly between the wealthy and the plebs. I mean, there was a variety of social issues, but it was the haves, the have-nots. And so what happened in the Roman Republic was that there were powerful generals that started to emerge. They had their own armies, and they became sort of the ones who dictated to the Senate of how things were to go, because they had the military. There isn't a central Roman army. And so we've got three generals that emerge that sort of take over the Roman Republic. They do it in what is called the triumvirate. There is Pompey, you'll know that name. Julius Caesar, that name. Marcus Crassus, probably not. But those three are the generals that had large armies, and they decide to step in with this perpetual war and all of this conflict and the haves, the have-nots, to manage it, to bring some peace to the Roman Empire, to the Roman Republic. In 49 BC, so now we're edging toward the time of Jesus, in 49 BC, civil war broke out in the Republic, and it was major civil war. In the end, one of the three survived, and that was Julius Caesar. He was the one that sort of defeated everything and became in control with his military, with his army, very strong military. And he won from the Senate the title of dictator for life. You did it. There's peace now. You can be the dictator. So now we're going back to king times again. Only now there is some laws and rules that have been put into place in the Republic. Well, we know from Julius Caesar days that didn't last very long. About 4 years later, you remember the Ides of March, and that is when Julius Caesar is assassinated by 2 senators. It's an inside job, Brutus and Cassius. And what takes place after that is sort of interesting, because a couple of years later, after the assassination of Julius Caesar, a general by the name of Octavian, which will become extremely important in the New Testament, Octavian and his lieutenant by the name of Mark Antony, and you might remember that name from the love affair this guy had with Cleopatra, and Cleopatra happened to be Pharaoh of Egypt. So there's some things that are going on here. So Octavian and Mark Antony, they traced down the assassins of Julius Caesar. They chased them all the way to Greece, to a town that we're familiar with in the New Testament, Philippi, the Philippians. Paul will start a church there. The town of Philippi was an incredible place because it was where they defeated these two assassins of Julius Caesar. The town was given special privileges. Well, you don't have to pay taxes ever because you helped us. It became a military retirement community. I mean, Philippi was huge that way. Mark Antony, Octavian turns on Mark Antony, his lieutenant. Mark Antony goes down to Egypt to be with his lover, Cleopatra. They have 3 kids, I think it is. In the end, he will be defeated along with Cleopatra. They both will commit suicide. And Octavian goes on as he goes down to Egypt. He also conquers the Greek Empire at the time. And this is the expanse of the Roman Empire. He's the guy in the year 27, marks the beginning of the empire. He's the guy that will be declared Augustus Caesar. Augustus is a title. August, powerful. Who's the Caesar at the time of Jesus? Augustus Caesar. Augustus Caesar now, he is the emperor. We have now moved into a new form of government. It is the dictator. Because Augustus Caesar was in total control. The Senate was sort of moved aside. The Senate was expected to sort of back up Augustus Caesar and do his will. But we are in a transition period when Jesus comes onto the scene, as the empire now is adjusting from going from a republic to an empire ruled by an emperor. That becomes important. The republic ends, the transition period begins into the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire is huge. It's huge. So the Palatine Hill, we were in Italy a year and a half ago, so this is a picture I took. The Palatine Hill is still around today. It's been there for almost ever. But this is the place where the city of Rome starts. Carol and I are on the hill. You're looking down into the valley that's known as the Forum. This is where the governmental offices were located at. But up on the hill is where the king's palace was located at, where the wealthy people lived. And then down in the valley was where the Forum was located at, where the government offices and things were located at. This building that I've got in the circle is the Roman Senate building, which surprisingly has lasted for centuries and centuries and centuries. It was converted into a church. The only reason I would point that out is that when Paul goes to Rome and he stands trial, it is very likely that he would have been in that building at some point. So if you go down the hill and look back up, this is the Palatine Hill. So this is where the kings lived. This is where the royalty lived in the city of Rome. Still around today, some of the remnants of the palaces that are located there. So there are 85 emperors that will rule the Roman Empire, starting with Caesar Augustus. And the ones that we're interested in really are two of them, Augustus Caesar and then Nero. Nero will be the guy that will be the emperor when Paul is in his ministry. And it's likely that actually, if a person, depending on how you think about Paul's end, whether he actually was executed or whether he went on, he would have stood trial before the emperor. The emperor would have been Nero. So Jesus is born during the reign of Augustus Caesar. It is the transition into the empire concept where you've got just one emperor who rules it all and who's gotten in total control. This is also a guy, Caesar Augustus, who decides that it would be good to find out just who belonged to the empire. And so one way you would do that, have a census, when Quirinius was governor of Syria. Caesar Augustus. Whoops. Maybe go back there again a second there. Let's go back. The emperors were in total power. I mean, this is absolute power. Heavy taxation, and that heavy taxation really was the thing that was sort of the tipping point in Israel that led to the destruction of the temple. The heavy taxation, there were really three taxes that were imposed on people. There were taxes on land. So if you were wealthy, if you had a lot of land, your land could be taxed or was taxed. There was taxes on goods sold or goods marketed. And then there was the institution under Caesar Augustus of the head tax, just being part of the empire. That's the tax that Quirinius, the governor of Syria, was managing. You had to go to your ancestral home and register and pay the tax. And that's where they found out how many people were part of the Roman Empire. So the taxation, the heavy taxation, was also designed to keep people happy. Public works, building of aqueducts, the building of public baths, the building of the road system. I mean, that all came as a price. But part of it was to keep people happy. I mean, look how much better things are because of the infrastructure stuff we're doing. But in order to pay for that, you had to have taxation. And it wasn't so much of a burden to the wealthy, but it was to the poor. So again, this is how large the Roman Empire will grow. The largest extent will be in the year 114 AD, about 75 years or so after Jesus. We've got two main parts that Bible times connect to. The one in the black circle would be basically the Bible, but Paul's ministry takes place over in Greece, and it's that blue circle is where he will write the letter to the Romans in the city of Corinth. Just a quick word about the Greek Empire. The Greek Empire existed side by side with the Roman Empire for a number of centuries, and actually the Greek Empire predates the Roman Empire. The city-state of Rome is created after the Greek Empire actually exists. But the Greek Empire is sort of this eastern side of the Mediterranean. Probably the one person that you would know out of the Greek Empire, because the Greek Empire actually was a democracy in many respects. They did elect people as leaders and stuff. The Romans, I think, investigated that, but that was a little bit too much of an extreme for them to go to. I think they felt more happy about having the wealthy people in charge. But under the Greek Empire, what becomes significantly important, I think, in New Testament times is Alexander the Great. He lives about 3.5 centuries before the time of Christ. Alexander doesn't rule very long, but the Greek Empire grows massively on the east side of the Mediterranean Sea. One of the things that Alexander insisted was that Greek culture and the Greek language needed to be implanted in everything they conquered. So if the Greeks came to town, you learned Greek. That was your language. You learned Greek philosophy. You learned the Greek culture. And you understand now the Roman Empire having two sides to it. The Latin side, the Greek side. Greece and Greek were heavily implanted into the Middle East, into the eastern side of the empire. A few words about the life of Jews between Old Testament and New Testament times, because this also becomes important. We remember back into the Old Testament that, of course, under the United Kingdom, as the Jews settled into the Promised Land, there were three kings of the United Empire and the United Kingdom. There was Saul, who was then followed by David. David was followed by his son Solomon. Solomon, after he died, the country went into civil war, split into north and south. We've got the northern kingdom, which takes the name of Israel. We've got the southern kingdom, which takes the name of Judah. The northern kingdom sort of goes off the rails quite quickly. They are defeated by the Assyrians in the year 722. That kingdom will not rise again. The southern kingdom is warned that if they didn't keep faithful to God, they were going to be punished and destroyed as well. And they are in the year 586 BC by the Babylonians. Those two are sort of red letter dates that we remember in the Old Testament. So what happens to them? Well, remember that the Jews, when they're defeated by the Babylonians, many of the Jews, particularly the wealthy and the educated ones, are carted off to Babylon, to what would be today Iraq. The Babylonians always thought that it would be better to manage the conquerees than it is to leave them out there in the distance and let them do what they want. Let's bring them to the capital and let's keep track of them. And so there is this massive, massive captivity, this massive migration into Babylon. Persia will eventually come and take over the Babylonians. Persia would be today Iran. And the Persians permit the Jews to go back to the homeland. Some of them do, some of them don't. We have a spreading out of the Jews. In the midst of all of this, the Greeks come into power now, and they take over the Middle East. And so Judea would have been part of that takeover. There's a lot of history packed into the Greek control of the Middle East, particularly the northern part of Greece, the Seleucid Empire. Antiochus Epiphanes, you might have heard that name before. Not a good guy, certainly did not like the Jews at all. In fact, humiliated the Jews by sacrificing pigs in the temple, putting pagan gods up in the temple in Jerusalem. I mean, anything to sort of to run the Jews down. There is a revolt that happens in Judea, and it is the uprising of the Maccabees. Now, the Maccabees, if you've ever panned through a Catholic Bible, you'll see a couple of books labeled 1st and 2nd Maccabees, and this is the revolt. This is about the revolt. They will push off the Greeks. They win their independence. The temple is cleaned. Hanukkah is the cleaning of the temple. It is the lights back on. It is the cleaning out. And so the Hasmoneans, the Maccabees, come to power, but they're only in power for about a century. And then there is Rome that's growing and becoming more powerful. And a guy by the name of Pompey, in the year 63 BC, conquers Judea. And Judea, I mean, it's like a no-brainer, quite honestly. It would have been hard pressed for Judea, for the Jews, really to see themselves as probably being untouchable, because it's a land bridge. No matter how you slice and dice it, it's the land bridge between Asia and Europe and Africa. You could have taken ships. A lot easier to travel on the land. And so if you're traveling south or north, where do you have to go through? Through Israel, through Syria. I mean, those two always became sort of pawns in the political dynamics that were happening in north and south, because it's the land bridge. And if you go much farther east, you're in desert. So you're going to travel on next to the Mediterranean Sea. So what happens with Pompey he conquers the Middle East, the eastern part of it, for the Roman Republic, and they set up a series of puppet kings, kings that manage but are accountable to Rome, to the Roman Senate, and they happen to put into place the Herod clan. The Herod clan. The Herods are not a good folk, and particularly Herod the Great, who starts it all off in the year 37 BC. He will last until 4 BC. This is the guy that likely is the guy that's in place when Jesus is around. I don't want to get into a lot of dating issues here, but a lot of people sort of believe Jesus is born in the year 0, and there really wasn't a year 0. It's trying to figure out where that year was at. And in some respects, there is, when you look at calendars and stuff, it is possible that the birth of Jesus actually takes place in BC, a few years before 0. This would have been the guy in place, Herod the Great. I mean, Herod the Great is the guy who starts the overhaul of the temple in Jerusalem. He's the guy who wants to build these big public things because he wants the people to love him. He is also a lunatic. A lot of people believe that the guy was mentally ill. He killed his wife. He killed a bunch of people. If he was ever suspicious of people, he would kill them. And he didn't spare his family. When Herod the Great died, the kingdom under the Romans was divided into 3 parts. And the 3 sons that actually did live took over 3 parts of the empire. Herod Antipas will be the king that will be a part of Jesus' ministry. So you can see how all of this sort of is going through, and particularly we're living through tumultuous times in the Middle East when Jesus and Paul are on the scene. And yet, when you look at all of this, there probably wasn't a better time for Christianity to emerge. And there's a reason behind that. If we push on here a little bit, during the time of Jesus and Paul, tensions started to grow with the Roman Empire. The Jews were not happy with taxation. They weren't happy with a variety of things. There was always that hope that we could get rid of the Romans and we can become independent again. And they try. There's militant groups that arise in Judea, in Israel. The Sicaries and the Zealots in particular are 2 militant groups that were very active during the time of Jesus and Paul. The Sicaries were noted for going into large groups, group gatherings, and they carried knives of stabbing people. I'll show you a picture of a Sicarian knife in a second here, but they could create a lot of havoc. And particularly what they were looking for was Roman people, because we want to get rid of them. We make their lives miserable. And so Sicaries and Zealots really, they lash out at Rome, and partly because of the heavy taxation. They just didn't believe that was fair, and it was really the pagan government that's over us. And so many of the folks fled from Jerusalem. The dispersion of the Jews sort of picks up here. A lot of people leave Jerusalem. War breaks out in Judea in 66 AD. Rome decides it had had enough. One of the things that came with Augustus Caesar and the movement to the Roman Empire was that they did not take any kind of revolt lightly. They wanted peace. And if there was anybody who was going to become a troublemaker, they would be either imprisoned or killed. So if you've got people in Jerusalem in particular trying to raise havoc and get rid of the Romans were watching, and they finally had enough in 66 and came in. Because their appointees apparently weren't keeping everybody under control. And so there was a siege of Jerusalem in the year 70 AD between April and August. And in the end, that will lead to the destruction of Jerusalem, and more importantly, the destruction of the temple. What happens is that you've got a couple of religious political groups, the Sadducees and the Pharisees. Paul's a Pharisee. We'll talk about him in a little while here. But the Sadducees, who were in sort of control of the temple, they disappear because there's no temple left. And the last resistance, of course, you've heard of Masada, where about 1,000 Jews died. That was the last hurrah. Masada is located in the southern part of Israel, down by the edge of the Dead Sea. King Herod the Great had built a palace on the side of this mountain. If you're going with us to Israel and to Egypt, we will be there. We will stop there and we will go up to the top of the hill in Masada. But this is the last stand. What the Romans did, and this shows you how bent on the fact they were going to keep people in control. You've got the remnants of the Jews that are up here on Masada. They decide to build the rampart. This all is built by the Romans, that side there. So they get up to the top. It was a hard hill. It was a hard mountain to defend, to conquer. It was fairly easy for the Jews to defend it. But it is this road, this hill, that the Romans built to get up there. And sure enough, they defeated them in the year 73. This is a Sakari sword, or knife. It's wide, and you can imagine it being pierced in somebody's side. There isn't, I mean, it's amazing even today with knife crimes and stuff of how a lot of people don't survive those things. I mean, the knives go into people's organs and stuff, and what do? I mean, you can't unzip it and sort of fix it. And so knife injuries were deadly. So this is at the time of Paul, this would have been presumably what the Temple Mount would have looked like at the time of Jesus, time of Paul. The temple itself, the holy place, was right here. You've got this huge courtyard. You've got vendors and people selling stuff around the edge here. The temple area was large. I mean, it covered over 36 acres. It was about 1,600 feet by 1,000 feet. One of the things that we would be interested in at the time of Paul was this little fortress that was built on the edge of the Temple Mount area by the Romans. Because you see, Gentiles weren't really permitted in the temple. And so for the Romans to keep track of what's happening in that spot, they decided to build the Tower of Antonio to get it up high enough where they could look down and to see what was going on. This probably saved Paul's life, because when he comes back to to Jerusalem after his third missionary journey, there are some who believe that Paul brought into the temple area a non-Jew, a Gentile. And this is where they try to sort of tear Paul apart. And lo and behold, it's the Roman soldiers up in the Tower of Antonia that see what's happening. They go in and they rescue the guy. This in some respects is how Paul gets rescued and will head on to Rome. But in the year 70, the temple in Jerusalem is destroyed. It's reported that the gold that melted, that leaked out of the temple, leaked into all of the cracks, the stones, and that actually is what led the Roman soldiers to tear down the temple to get the gold out. That there was so much gold in that building that they just had to tear it all apart to get it in all of the crevices. So sort of an amazing time. So in Rome, the guy who leads the conquering of Jerusalem is Titus. Eventually he will become an emperor. They build an arch to him. This is down in the Roman Forum. This is a picture I took. On the side of the Titus arch, you can see here, this is part of the sacking of the Roman temple, of the temple in Jerusalem. That's on the side of the Titus arch. So, for Paul, this is a picture I took out of our apartment window when we were in Italy. We were right across the street from this thing. The Roman Colosseum is the site where Nero's palace was located at. The Colosseum will be built after Nero dies. It wasn't around at the time of Paul. It was close to being built, but not built yet. So what the Colosseum represents, since it's built about the time of Paul, it is evidence of just how incredible engineers the Romans were. I think so many people look at ancient times as being somewhat backwards, and they just aren't. They had conquered cement. They knew how to build with cement. The Roman Colosseum is this incredible structure that actually could be covered if it was rainy or sunny. There was a lake that used to be where the Roman Colosseum was built. It was Nero's lake. He had a little boat on it that he went out every once in a while. It didn't connect to anything. It was just his private lake. That's where the Colosseum is built over. It had a water source. They would flood the Colosseum sometimes to have games in it. They could have boats in the Colosseum. It's incredible. So this is likely what Nero's palace looked like at the time of Paul. Remember, Paul goes to Rome, and he gets there, not the way he wanted to, but he gets there as a prisoner, and he is put on trial, and likely he would have stood trial either in the Senate area in the Forum or in this place, which is Nero's palace. And this lake here was just a man-made lake. That's where the Colosseum is at today. Because when Nero died, they tore this down and they built the Colosseum. And we know what life was like sort of at the time of Paul. If we're talking about the letter to the Romans and the time that Paul lives, we know exactly how the things were built. And partly because of Pompeii and Herculaneum. When the volcano erupted and it covered those two cities, and as they uncover them, we know exactly how they lived. Pompeii is incredible in terms of they continue to uncover it. These are Roman buildings that would have dated back to the time of Paul. You've got villas and homes. The Romans loved red. These are some of the villas that have existed that they've uncovered. The beautiful mosaics that were uncovered this would have been prevalent at the time of Paul, because this is the time of Paul. You've got these beautiful frescoes that existed on walls that decorated things, and storerooms and storehouses. They had bathrooms, public baths. People are always interested in this when you go over, what did you do when you had to go to the bathroom? And actually, the public baths were important infrastructure projects that kings and senates and stuff could do to help the people. So this is where you sat. They were communal, so there wasn't a men's and a women's side. They had a stream of water that ran underneath the toilet area, so sewage could be taken out. There is a little trough that goes out in front of the toilet area, and so they would use a shared sponge, because they didn't have toilet paper at that time. And this led to an incredible amount of disease. They weren't aware of what they were doing, is that this was really the disease part that led to a lot of illnesses and stuff in the Roman Empire. Private people, the wealthy people, had toilets in their houses, or they had private ones. And I'll tell you, it's not always hot in the Middle East. How would you warm the toilet seat? You paid slaves. They would sit on it, preheat it for you. There was a sewage system. Sewage systems were around for a long time in Israel. This would have been time of Paul. Paul would have gone through all this kind of stuff. There were billboards on the sides of buildings. They've uncovered them in Pompeii. There was an election coming up. This is an electioneering billboard. They had very few kitchens in people's homes. This is a Chick-fil-A. Thermopylaeum is hot to sell. And as you can tell, I mean, this is what was on there that they've uncovered. It's like a Chick-fil-A. There was another one in Herculaneum. You didn't have kitchens in your house in many cases. You went out to eat. You had to buy food and bring it home. A lot of the Roman that had money had villas. We know what villas look like because they're uncovered. This is the time of Paul. So we don't think of Paul's time as being backwards or somehow, in some kind of dark ages kind of thing. This would have been the city of Rome that Paul would have come to apart from the Colosseum, because that had not been built yet. But the population of Rome, when Paul rolled into town, was about 1 million people. It's a very, very large city. And again, this is the Palatine Hill. That's where we were at with those pictures. And then this would have been where Nero's palace was located at. This is all Paul's time. Paul would have been part of all of this. The Pantheon that exists in Rome today, that was around during the time of Paul. It's been rebuilt. But one of the things that the Pantheon shows is that the Romans knew how to use concrete. This is the largest, and it looks like a painting. This is a picture I took of it with a hole in the middle. This is the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world that still stands almost 2,000 years later. There's no rebar in this. It's amazing. I mean, the Romans, from an architectural standpoint, incredible. This is the city of Jerusalem, likely at the time of Paul. The Temple Mountain, looking now up from the Valley of David. The area there in red is where the Western Wall will be located at, where the wall known as the Wailing Wall exists today. That's what has survived. The Wailing Wall here, again, if you're going with us to Israel and to Egypt, we will be stopping here. But this part would date back to the time of Jesus and Paul. It was actually an alleyway. There were shops and stuff along it. Where this plaza is located, that would have all been covered with shopping area. And again, this is the temple. Paul likely would have probably had his issue with being ripped apart in this courtyard area, and the Romans come down and they save him, and that will send him off into the city of Rome. So this is the takeaway. There was peace in the Roman Empire. They did not want any revolt or any kind of shenanigans to challenge the power of the emperor. So there was peace and stability. High taxation. It's estimated that well over 90% of the people were living in poverty. And that sets up this clash between the wealthy and the poor. There is an extensive road system that the Romans have built, which means that Paul can get around. There is an extensive maritime system where you can also travel by boat, by ship. There is a legal system in place. It's not necessarily democratic, but at least there were protections, in particular for Roman citizens. And what is Paul? A Roman citizen. We don't know how he got it, but he and his father did. They tolerated diversity. They had to, because they were spread over so many cultures and so many locations around the Middle East. But what they did not tolerate is anybody who challenged the authority of the Romans. If you did, then you likely would be either jailed or executed. That's why the crucifixion of Jesus fits into all of this. That's why the crucifixion of Christians become sort of, okay, this makes some sense, because the Romans don't want any kind of challenge to the power structure. It is Hellenized. Hellenized means that it is a Greek culture. People spoke Greek. Jesus likely would have spoken Greek. Probably knew Aramaic, but it's Greek. And that culture of the Greeks were there as well, even though it was the Roman Empire. And I believe it's one of the best times. If Christianity was going to emerge, this would be the time you'd pick. Stability, road system, communication, Yeah. So when Pentecost takes place, the message sort of spreads out. You don't have to go down little trails. You got the Roman roads. You got boats. You got ships. You can get around. Oh, yeah, I think we're done. Well, we didn't get quite as far as... So I hope your head doesn't explode with details. But again, it's understanding this bigger picture that I think we miss sometimes in the New Testament era, is that the Roman Empire is sort of the new kid on the block. And there's a lot of challenges to what was happening, moving from Roman Republic to Roman Empire governed by a dictator who had all the power. That was happening at the time of Jesus and Paul. Okay. Well, we'll pick up next week where we left off, I guess. Let's close with a word of prayer. Gracious Heavenly Father, thank you again for bringing us together. Always a wonderful opportunity to come together on a Sunday morning and to explore your word and explore the world in which this message comes forth. We celebrate the fact that you loved us so much that you sent your son Jesus into the world, and it is through his life, death, and resurrection that we are forgiven and saved. And it's also that joy that we have of carrying out to other people, to share the good news that Paul will share and spread Christianity throughout the Middle East. Thank you for that, and thank you for the blessings that you provide us. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Thanks.